movement, like the struggle of 2012, and write some materials about them. So I really got like the chance while everybody was like demobilizing because it was summer, and like then we knew that there were going to be some elections and stuff. But meanwhile, I had the chance to focus on that more like theoretical part. So I wrote a text about that in French, of course, and like some magic thing translated, as Mona said. So, and when I wrote this piece, I was really inspired by like all the. I think like the piece for that book, I wrote it after the elections, and like after what appeared to me like a really bitter ending of the movement. But still, I think when I wrote it, I was still like full of energy and inspiration of what had happened, and like I was also involved in 2005 student strike. So I thought like when 2012 happened, I thought I knew what to expect, but no, it was really different, and like some things happened during the 2012 movement that really gave me a lot of hope and inspiration. And one of those things is all the disobedience that happened during the strike. So that disobedience happened like in every small illegal direct action that we did during the strike, from like breaking banks' windows to like just changing the advertising of the Bixi bicycles, or blocking the street because we're having like a yoga workshop on St. Catherine, or whatever. All those small direct actions were illegal and were a way for people to like reappropriate the space and like use it and transform it, and something that people don't really think to do usually. I mean, most of the people. And it was also, of course, like some disobedience actions that were really directed towards like specific laws. And we also always think about like the special law, but actually, which was important disobedience movement against that special law. But even more important, I think, it was like just 1 month before, in April, May, there was all this movement of disobeying the injunctions that were going to impeach the strike to happen in many CEGEP and universities where people voted for the strike, but some injunctions came to impeach it like based on like individual rights argumentation, and that was very important. Like the disobedience that happened against those injunctions were really, I think they changed the course of the strike, and they led to the special law in part, you know. So, so I kind of was wondering what made it possible for so many people who actually might have had already a political sense before the strike, but had never thought about disobeying, like not obeying the rules and the laws. Like what happened exactly during that moment that made us able to do that as a big part of the society was participating in disobeying. And I think like one of the things that had that effect was like the policial brutality. Because I think a lot of people experienced for the first time like the violence of the state, and it kind of make it more clear, like, oh, so this is how power is like configured in society, and this is why he's hitting me right now. And it really make it more clear to some people that never experienced it before, and I think that really like diminished the legitimacy of the state and of the government. But also the attitude of Charest's government during the strike really helped people to like get to really like revolt and also disobey. I mean, and because that's one of the questions, like, why are we now so tolerant now in 2014? There's a lot of things that we're tolerating without getting into that that state of mind that we could like disobey and like deliberately and openly violate the laws because we're like struggling for justice and social public services and stuff. And so, yeah. So a part of it was wondering what happened in 2012. And so a thing that I don't know if I came up with some lessons from the strike, but for sure I think it's impressive to realize how that moment, how that struggle transformed some people. Like, we're being taught to like obey, and like docility and obedience are promoted since we're like kids, and we're taught that all our lives. And then, like just in a few weeks, a lot of like thousands of people changed that. There was like a shift in people's mind that made them able to disobey, and I think that's really wonderful. But I think it also fades out really fast after when you're not like in that collective moment. And I think like Joël is kind of gonna talk about something related to that when he speaks. So that's one of the things I found was really interesting, and also like just the fact that we were having this struggle in the streets while the government was all the time telling us, oh no, we live in a democracy and those decisions have to be made like during the elections. You voted for that. Now if you don't, like everybody won't plead. The street is not the place to like make the political decisions and changes and stuff. So just like doing that struggle, that big movement, was already disobeying the idea of what our citizenship is, like and disobeying it by getting out of the small spaces that the government and the state is granting to us to like act and say what we think. And I think for sure like this is something scary for any government. And I'm just going to end with a quote from the Minister of Justice of Quebec in 2012. He said, "Oh, disobedience is just a nice way of saying vandalism." You know, like, because it could be so subversive to understand like how, like that disobedience that we were able to do during the strike was really something fundamental, and that deepened the struggle, because it was not that part of disobedience that happened was not just because we were predicting accessibility of education. It went much further than it was supposed to be at the beginning. And yeah, and I just feel it's great to be here tonight to like cultivate that memory and the transformation, because we have to like talk about it, write about it, and stuff, because it fades out and we're like in the daily life, and so it's always good to be together and talk about it. Thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming out in the driving rain. It's like the first not so nice day of the year, so thanks for coming out. I'm going to talk a bit about the piece that I wrote for the book. It's called Down Riot, for like a few minutes, and then I'm going to talk about some like current questions that I'm asking myself about like where do we go from now, sort of 2 years after the strike. And there's like a bit of an open mic after this panel and after a short break, so if you want to like come up and respond to anything that we said, you could come up to the open mic and just, you know, share some thoughts, or, you know, whatever, just come up to us and have conversations afterwards. But I'm going to ask some questions and you might have answers. Okay, so I wrote a piece about the demonstrations on, I think, April 20th and 21st against the Pall Mall. You know, in 2012 during the strike. And it's sort of a piece that chronicles exactly what happened in the streets that day, or some of what exactly happened in the streets. But also talks about like what the Pall Mall is in general, and like why were people against that, and why, I suppose, are people against that. And the final part of the piece is about like the limits of, or the struggles of like having an anti-colonial discourse, like in social movements in Quebec or in the left. So it's like a three-part piece, like what happened in the streets, what the Pall Mall is, and why is it so freaking hard for people to be anti-colonial. So you can read it online eventually. And I guess like part of like why I wrote this piece was that I felt like this was maybe like the high point of the strike in terms of like militancy in the streets, but also in terms of convergence of different movements. So, you know, I'm mostly just gathering information from like various sources in one place so people can like recall and go forward from that strong point in the strike. And just to like remind people or to inform people, like this was a moment where people like successfully like drove the cops away from a riot. You know, there's some like pretty iconic pictures of like cops running away, wrestling the air in front of them as like a riot runs after them. So I wanted to kind of like put that in words, but it was also an interesting moment in the strike where there wasn't just, you know, a student demonstration called. There were also like Indigenous women coming up from Nord, like to protest against the Palma. There were like all sorts of organizations and groups of people, you know, organizing to be outside of this job fair for, you know, basically northern extraction, northern resource extraction. So it was like a convergence of different movements, and I felt like it was kind of like a moment of extreme, amazing potential. So read it. Let me know what you think. So, like I said, I have a few like current thoughts or current reflections, like 3 years after the strike that I wanted to share. And like, you know, if you want to come up in the open mic and talk about it, that'd be great. So like, something I've noticed 2 years on after the strike is there's like a really screwed up situation around like repression and municipal bylaws out of P6 or the one in Quebec City or other places. Like there's a really screwed up version of P6 in Gatineau where like individual organizers can be targeted more heavily as well. So it's not just P6, there's like a set of laws in Quebec or municipal bylaws that like create all sorts of like problems with repression and demonstrations. And like something I've noticed is that since the strike, there are a lot more people who are like willing to defy these kind of bylaws, but at the same time they've intensified, they've become like harsher, or the fines have become more intense. And so some people are like more afraid of any kind of organizing a demonstration. So like a question that I have for you folks is like how have you been dealing with that, and like where do we go from a situation where like some people are super willing to fuck shit up, and then a situation where you know, some folks are like genuinely pretty afraid of these new and more intense bylaws. And like what I have in mind when I say that is like, for example, the like organization, well, it's called the Front commun des personnes assistées sociales du Québec, like the association of like socially assisted people or people on welfare in Quebec, like have a position to like respect municipal bylaws because people are afraid of, you know, people who are on welfare, which is about $800 a month, like they're afraid of having to pay a $600 ticket, right? So like, this has made me reflect on things and made me reflect on like how people have been responding to this situation where like, before the strike, I think, or before the intensification of these bylaws, people are not so much having these debates of like, do we go our route, do we not? And like afterwards, like this has created a bit of a, you know, a complexity in organizing. So I was wondering if people have noticed that and what, you know, they do to deal with that. And more generally, like, this is gonna sound like maybe a general question, but like, what have people noticed in terms of like how the strike has radicalized some people and how some people have been sort of like nonplussed by it? Well, I've noticed that like, you know, for example, in the community sector in Quebec, there are tons of folks who are like super inspired by the strike and are just like, let's keep going, you know, we have to keep pushing social movements along. And then some folks are like, you know, we didn't see any of that, like we didn't, you know, we weren't a part of that, that was students or whatever. So I'm wondering like how people have been, you know, living the sort of 2 years after the strike in their own organizing, either like in student organizations or unions or whatever, or anywhere else in other social movements. Like, what does that look like when a lot of people have been radicalized, but some people just like don't feel like that was them, you know? Like, how have you been dealing with that sort of division? So all this is not to say that like the strike created all sorts of divisions where like some people were radicalized and some people just like couldn't be bothered, but like I think it intensified something that was already there. So where do we go from here? Like, how do you deal with a situation where some people are radicalized and some people could be radicalized? I think that wraps up what I had to say. I'll pass it off to Gia and come up with the mic.
everyone. Thanks for being here. It's amazing. So I'm going to start off once again acknowledging Matthew Brett, a very good friend and comrade, contribution to this book project. Parallel to I suppose Mona and Rosalind's plans for writing, Matthew and I have been working, and we did write a couple of articles, but we have been working on how this information can be passed on to, not necessarily passed on to people outside of Quebec, but people outside of Quebec were asking for information, were looking for ideas, and in terms of trying to understand how this was built. So in addition to publishers from rest of Canada contacting Matthew when he gave a keynote speech actually in Waterloo during a Congress, Social Sciences Congress. In addition to that, we had, well, I think everybody knows that there was interest from rest of Canada. There were many speaking tours. I was involved in some, but there were many others. There have been requests right from 2012, but even now, these requests keeps on coming. Very recently, the California statewide student union contacted us asking for more information of trying to understand how it was built, how it was structured, how you guys were able to sustain this much mobilization, and how it was like kind of transition from a campus-based organization to one that was very, very popular on the streets. So there was another question, another request we got, which is kind of relevant to my talk here, is that it was students from a group called Students for Justice for Palestine. They wanted to know how we were organized as a movement, because they wanted to try and see if that's something that they can learn from in their own organization in the United States. So I guess I can go on giving examples, so I should just stop there. What I'm trying to say basically is there is this intense interest from students, community groups outside of Quebec in trying to understand how this movement was built. And I think one important aspect of this is that everybody recognizes, we know, but people outside of Quebec also recognize that it was not a spontaneous movement, it was something that was built. It was something that was organized over at least 2 years, if not longer. Laurence might say it took even longer than 2 years, but those who've been in 1975, they know that this, or like some might say, it's Quebec student movement history. So this is building up. So what I'm trying to say is that this was not a spontaneous movement. It was organized. It was mobilized, and we need to talk about it. We need to try and understand how those things work. What were the dynamics that made it happen? And there were many lessons to be learned from that. I guess one basic thing that I'm trying to understand here is how we can broadly apply the lessons from the student movement to the popular struggles of our current day. I guess kind of on the similar lines as well, but I want to understand the dynamics. And I guess there's another question that comes up fairly regularly, and I think that also ties into the lessons learned from the movement, is the question that comes up more often than not when there's a demonstration happening for anything on the streets, like in the last couple of years. People ask, where are the students? Why aren't they involved? Why aren't they mobilized? They should be here. And I think it's an important question, and it merits a reflection and a detailed understanding. And I think what I'm trying to say is that in order to answer to that question, you have to understand how the movement was built. So that actually is something that's covered in the chapter that I actually had honor co-authoring with Nadia Ospada, who's here, and Hugo Bonnet. It's a chapter on direct democracy, grassroots mobilization, and civic civil movement. So I'll let you read about that. And there are many questions to be asked, I think. There are many things to be challenged as well. So that's something that we can have other discussion, another point, I suppose, or online. I guess what I'll focus now for the rest of the time I have left here is the importance of grassroots mobilization, which in turn will answer the two questions that were raised about how we can have more mobilization, or how we can apply lessons from the movement to our current struggles, and where are the students now. But in order to address that, I will first go over my personal experience of how I got involved in the movement, and then about my reflections or learning from the strike as to how we can maybe how at least in the moments in which I was involved before the strike and I'm involved now, how those lessons can be applied there, at least from my opinion. So just to talk about my own involvement in the strike, I think I got involved on April 1st, 2010. At least that's what I kind of remember. In the sense that when the austerity measures were put in place or were announced, and it was the effect on not only increase in tuition fees, but also the increase in hydro rates and the flat fee for the healthcare. For someone like me, who was coming from India, and I come from fairly low-income family, I would say. Like when I knew the impact of an increase, what it meant on our budget. Like when I was young, since I was young, I used to help my mom with her monthly budget just because I was good in math, so she would ask me to help with it. So I knew that the moment there was an extra expense coming in a month, she had to borrow money from my uncle. Like when I was in primary, I couldn't take part in my the end of year theater program because we couldn't afford to buy a costume that we had to buy. So right away I knew that this thing is a problem. But the reason why I'm telling this whole story here is because even for somebody like me who was sold right away in a sense, like who was convinced right away that this is not the right thing, I had to go through a long process of mobilization to understand what this means, what is the impact, not only on me, but on society. Back then I joined Free Education Montreal, who was already involved in fighting tuition increases. Joel and Nadia were involved in that group, and many others, of course. So then I guess then I'm putting myself in the place of those students who weren't convinced, who needed to be mobilized, and how it was done. Like we went through a long process. So I'm talking about 2 years now, as in two years of mobilization, where there were a number of occasions. There were workshops, there were panel discussions, there were one-on-ones, there were class visits, tabling, flyering. All this it was required to let students kind of understand this issue, but not only understand, but engage with the process, and then understand the implication, the broader social implication as well. And all this was happening in the backdrop of the austerity measures. So this education, this popular education process had to happen for the strike course to take place, so that in general assemblies, students were able to not only make a proposition, but also argue for the point. So it just didn't happen au pif, like you say in French. It was a process. So what I'm trying to say, I guess, here is that guess that the lesson from the strike is that we need mobilization. If we expect students to take part in something, or they think that there is an issue that affects them, but they might not necessarily are exposed to all the consequences or the impact of something that's happening, then we have to reach out to them. We have to bring the issue to them and have discussions with them. And I guess I'm saying this because since the strike, I've had a number of discussions with a lot of people who are here as well about, like, you know, okay, so it was amazing. Like, we had the movement, we won in some sense, but what now? And what do we learn from this? And how do we take this forward? It's great that we might have another strike, offensive or not, for student movement, but I think there are implications for other movements as well. And how do we learn from that? And I guess I'm at this point, at least, well, I've had these discussions at least in two sort of campaigns. One on the Palestine, like the Palestine solidarity issue, or with those groups. They've done amazing work. They've done a lot of grassroots work, like for BDS, for boycott, divestment, and sanctions. For students to adopt that, Tadamon, one of the solidarity group, they did workshops in each and every single associations. So the students were empowered. They knew they were engaged, and they were able to pass those motions in the General Assembly because they purely grassroots process. So they've done that, and it's amazing. And now I'm discussing that with people. Not necessarily like I'm saying that this is the right way, that's what you have to go, but that's basically what I'm thinking might be effective. It would be good in a discussion session if people want to come up and talk about this. But what we need to do is, especially about climate justice, climate change, this discussion has to happen. If you're talking about students and that they are affected, one, and second, that they need to be implicated, then this issue has to go to them. With debates, discussions, all kinds of engagement, like creating spaces where the discussion can happen. And I'm just thinking about maybe Klein was going to speak next week for launching our book. That's awesome. I think it's good that there is something like this, but only one thing doesn't work, and it kind of brings me back to the student movement. You know, there was an escalation of pressure, one, and there were diversity of tactic, you know, and kind of diversity of means of pressure as well, and means of contacting students. So it's good to have big 500 people room discussions, or like a theater presentation. Like Naomi Klein, but we also need to have like down-to-earth discussions where people can debate, people can engage, and they can understand. And I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but basically what I'm trying to say is that if we want a mass movement to happen, or if we want students to come out on the street, then it has to happen at their level, and so that they're able to discuss it in their General Assembly and bring it back to their direct democracy, like taking positions in their assembly. So I guess it comes down to basically grassroots mobilization. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I wish we had like 3 times as much time to talk about this. There's so much to say. I'm going to suggest that people who need to get up and stretch, or use the bathroom, or order more food, or move closer, do so now. Take a few minutes, and then we're going to show you the website so you know what you're out here for, and open up the mic to anyone who wants to respond to that great panel. Can we get a round of applause for Norman and for the panel?